Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread 8. Tonight, we have some cryptid stories for you. These people experienced their own true horror story with Bigfoot. So enjoy, but don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I live north of Greenville, Texas. Just get off of northbound Highway 69. I've lived here for 12 years and strange things have happened at my house ever since I moved in. But in the last 2 or 3 years, they've really started to happen more often. I live off Highway 69 on a dirt road. There are a lot of woods near me, and I also have a lot of neighbors. In the late summer of 2017, there was a loud banging on my house in the middle of the night. I knew I wasn't dreaming because I jumped straight up, and my 2 small dogs flew off my bed, barking and running around. I stumbled into the kitchen, not sure what was going on, and looked at the clock. It was 2:38 am. I thought it was strange that my 2 big dogs weren't barking when they were outside. I got in touch with the sheriff's office. Every 2 or 3 months after that, 2 deputies went out and found nothing. I have a lot of problems for a week or 2, then nothing for a month or 2 or 3, and then things start happening again. This happened to me this past winter, from November 2019 to February 2020. Several things have happened to me on 3 different occasions while I was in bed watching TV. I heard a loud growl outside my bedroom that was loud enough to be heard over the TV. It was very loud and deep. I've heard tapping on the back of my house at night, and it's always around the same time. In January 2020, I was again in bed watching TV when I heard something rubbing on the back of my house on the wall where my bathroom is. My bedroom and bathroom are connected. My 2 small dogs jumped off the bed and barked their way into the bathroom through the back wall. Someone has thrown rocks at my house. Most of the time I'm home alone. But on April 18, 2020, between 11 and 11:30 p.m., my husband happened to be home. My dog started barking and wouldn't stop, so I got up and yelled at her to be quiet. When I got to my bedroom door, my cat was sitting in my rocking chair next to the door. I stopped to pet her, and then I heard that same loud guttural growl at my back door. My cat heard it, turned around and looked at the back door. I went and woke up my husband. When he looked out the back door, he saw nothing. I went to the front door, opened it, and called my dog. She wouldn't come close to the fence and was barking while looking at the back of my house, at my neighbor's house. Suddenly, she jumped back as if whatever it was coming toward her. I ran to my guest room to look out the window facing that way, and I saw something big and dark moving quickly across my neighbor's back pasture. My neighbor behind me lives alone, and on October 7, 2017, the same things have happened at her house. My wife, me and our dog went on a kayaking trip to Upper Priest Lake and a camping trip at Beaver Creek Campground at the end of the season. After loading the kayak, we drove a half-mile to the campground, but it was closed for the season. We didn't want to find another campsite, so we drove around the campground to the still open parking lot for the Tool Bay boat launch. We parked our car, unloaded our tent, sleeping bags, and cooking gear, and started to set up camp by moving things to a designated spot that would normally be reached by the campground road. I was a little worried about camping there after the campground had closed, but I figured that since it was getting dark, it was unlikely that a ranger would find us. Raining and getting cold, my wife wanted a campfire to keep warm after paddling to Upper Priest Lake. I didn't want to start a fire because I was still nervous about camping there and worried that a fire would draw attention to us. After we set up the tent and got everything where it needed to be, we heard a woo to the north of us. I could tell from across the road that it wasn't an owl, but someone calling for someone in the dark woods, like a hiker who was late getting back to the car, even though there were no other cars in the area. The sound was louder than any other owl I've ever heard. To me, the sound seemed to be coming from somewhere. A person with a lot of lung capacity. By this time, it was dark, and we couldn't see anything under the tree canopy outside our campsite. While my wife tried and failed to start a fire with some wet branches, I set up our sleeping gear in the tent. We heard a much closer and louder call all of a sudden. We were both nervous when we got the call. It was made by someone who was messing with us and creeping around our campsite at night. But we didn't hear any cars drive in, and we didn't see any headlights or flashlights. It was too dark and cloudy for anyone to drive or walk around in the woods without a light. My wife can hear better than I can, and she heard what she thought was a woo from a distance in the forest. She grabbed a flashlight and I walked about 75 feet back to our car to get my 9mm pistol. It was clear that this bird wasn't an owl. The call was way too loud and it made us both feel scared. The call was so loud that I could feel it in my chest. We saw that our dog didn't react to the calls because he stayed in camp and didn't act scared. But I felt that way even though I was carrying a gun. We didn't hear anything else the rest of the night after the last loud call. No cars drove into the parking lot for the boat launch, and we didn't hear any people or animals in the morning. I looked around our campsite for anything that had been moved, but I couldn't find anything. Later, when we got home, my wife looked up alcohols online, but she couldn't find anything that sounded like what we heard. Whatever made those calls around our campsite that night knew we were there and had lungs much bigger than an adult male's. It was around the middle of October in 2019 near the Blue Ridge Parkway. My boyfriend and I were delivering newspapers for the Roanoke Times. When this happened, we delivered between midnight and 6 in the morning. We were almost done with the route when we went to turn down this maintenance road that led nowhere because there were houses at the end that knew who got the paper. It was between 3:30 and 4 a.m. My boyfriend was driving on the gravel and maintenance road while I was at home. The headlights caught a glimpse of this thing standing where the grass met the road. It was about 7 feet tall and it ran up the hill. It kind of moved quickly. It didn't run, but it walked like a person. It was about 2 feet tall and had dark brown, shaggy hair. Its arms moved back and forth right below its knees. I yelled at my boyfriend to stop the car, but by the time he heard me, he was already on it. Whatever it was had already made it up the hill. My boyfriend moved the car so the lights would shine up the hill, and that's when we saw 2 bright red and yellow eyes looking back at us. Strangely, it was hiding behind a big tree, and the distance between its eyes and the ground was about 7 feet. It was easy to see the eyes blink. We sat there for about 10 minutes before deciding to finish the route and turn around. We did go back after we were done with the last house. It was gone, but you could see where the tree branches and grass had been pushed down from where it had been standing on the side of the road. Maybe less than a month before we saw it, we had heard tree knocks coming from deep in the woods, maybe a neighborhood or 2 away. When we heard it, it scared us so much that we just put the newspaper in a bag and threw it on the side of the road. My wife and I were out for a drive on the beautiful Highland Highway 152 Cranberry Glades area in the evening. Tuesday night 96:16. We had been taking pictures at the scenic overlooks. We had just left the Williams River overlook and were heading south. On 150, there was a stretch that was very straight and went down about 4 to 6, 1 to 2 miles south of the lookout over the Williams River. While we were driving, we both saw something in the weeds between the edge of the road and the bank that led up to the woods on the west side. When its head and neck stuck up above the weeds, I thought it was a deer at first. It was about 300 to 400 feet away, and as we got closer, it turned around like a face, but with its head down and its body in a half crouch. It then jumped up onto the bank, reached for a branch and pulled itself up. We were about 80 to 100 feet away from it when it jumped. When we got to where it had been standing, we couldn't see it, and we couldn't hear it running or breaking branches in the pine trees along the road. We both saw that the weeds in this area were as tall as the hood of a 3-4-ton Chevy pickup truck. We were making a guess that the creature was about 7.5 feet tall. The creature's hair was a mix of brown and brown gold. It was longer than deer hair, but not as long as Kaylee. I've never doubted that Sasquatch could be real, but now that I've seen one in person, I don't have to. As we were leaving, my arms and neck were covered with goosebumps, and neither of us could say anything for another 10 minutes. I am a Swedish archaeologist who is 52 years old and a proud member of the BFRO. Over the years, I've been on several BFRO expeditions in North America. 2009 expeditions to North Florida, Northern California, British Columbia, Vancouver Island, South 2009, and the Olympic Peninsula. I went on the expeditions in British Columbia in 2009 as well. In 2016 and 2019, I've been to North American conferences where John Green and Harrison Hot Springs were honored. In 2011, the Bigfoot Conference and the Sasquatch Summit will be held in Kennewick in 2017. I have also been walking around alone in the woods of North America. In a hotspot area, they were looking for Sasquatch in their tracks. In northern Florida, there is a forest. In February 2009, I found an old footprint in the sand above Bluff Creek in Northern California. At the same time, I found a footprint in the snow on a mountain road. I have pictures of both from May 2009. I was surprised by how easy it was to find Sasquatch footprints in the United States. I also went on the trips and took part in the conference that was held in Moscow and Siberia. The year was 2011. I've talked to people who were there, and I've heard many stories from people in the United States, Canada, and Russia. I know that Sasquatch is real, and I would probably stand by that at any time or place. I think Sasquatch is either our bipedal apes or something more human-like. The future will tell us what it is. In any case, I went to the BAFR 2016 British Columbia expedition, which took place from September 8th to the 11th. On Monday, September 12, the organizer and the rest of the group left the area where we had the expedition and started driving back to Vancouver. 4 men in 2 cars made up our group. I was riding in the second car as a passenger. This day, the sun was out and the landscape was very pretty for a Swedish tourist to look at. I looked out the windows of the car as much as I could and talked to the driver. After a long time on the road, around 3:30 p.m, by the 12-kilometre sign on Morris Valley Road, Weaver Creek Road, we were getting close to the bridge in the afternoon. Then I noticed something moving on the left side of the road. I turned my head to the left and saw something for about 2 or 3 seconds. A figure that looked like a human, but had an ape's head, and moved quickly from a trench up to some trees, and then stopped. Even though the body was still, the head was stuck to the car, and the eyes followed the car as it moved. I looked into the eyes of the figure, and they looked very mean. When I looked into his eyes, I felt really scared, and I had a thought right away. Swedish and the word ape, that's what I thought of. I would call it an instinctive response. His eyes were very scary, and he really did look like he would kill. He seemed smart, but he also seemed to know that being seen by a person could be dangerous. He wasn't at ease. He was upset. I could tell that the figure I saw was a man. Nothing like big breasts or wide hips. I'm 6'3", and I think he was about the same height as me. He was skinny and didn't have a lot of muscle. I didn't think he looked like Patty from Bluff Creek. Patty looks like a gorilla with 2 legs. When I met Bob Giblin in Kennewick in 2017, I told him this. He told me that they can look and be coloured in many different ways. Some more ape-like and some more human-looking. I saw a male that looked more like a mix of an orangutan and a person. He looked like a slender male around 20-35 in human age. He had short, brown-red hair all over his body. For some strange reason I can't figure out. I did not say anything or do anything. Nothing was done. I just froze. I didn't even tell the driver to stop the car or ask him to. This makes me sad because I had a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I had many weapons. As a Sweetan bear, cougar, or wolf country, I had 2 cameras in my side pockets, a knife, a tomahawk, and a bottle of bear spray. I have to be careful. The driver is a tough Canadian hunter with a lot of experience. When we got back to Vancouver and unloaded our gear, I told Jason about what I'd seen, but I felt so dumb for not telling him while we were still in the area. After that, Jason told me the BC person in charge. Bill Miller was looking into something an Italian man had seen on the other side of the bridge a few years ago. I feel bad about this, and I wish I had said and done something. But I've read so many stories on this site that I know it's normal to feel this way. I hope that I will get a second chance one day. On Wednesday, 2 days after my sighting, I drove a rented car back to the place where I'd seen the bird. I set up my tent at the closest campsite and spent 2 days walking around the area where I saw the male Sasquatch looking for his footprints. When I did this, I saw Bigfoot tracks in the moss on both sides of the road. They were about my size, but I don't think a person could have made them. On the other side of the road, I saw deer tracks in the moss. He seemed like he might have been looking for a deer. I would have been able to find out more if I had an experienced tracker. Under the bridge, there is a beautiful freshwater stream that flows into Harrison Lake. It's a very peaceful and beautiful place, but it's private property, and there are signs saying so everywhere. So I knew Thursday afternoon that I had broken the law. BFROBC. Investigator. Sat Jason. Reason went to the place where I had seen something, and we walked around and looked for signs in 2017 before the second expedition in the area, and I was back at the spot where I saw another BFROBC. In the fall of 2011, I went to an investigator and told him what I had seen. I wrote an archaeology essay for a college in my country. Sasquatch was my subject. I got points for that essay at Swedish University. In it, I tried to figure out the I-key level of Sasquatch based on what they do, how they act, and when people see them. I've been thinking about that essay lately. What does it take for an animal to be smart? To know that it's best to only move the head and not the body if you want to hide but still be able to see the person. I was working in the oil field as an emergency medical responder and waiting for a gas. We'll work over near where the Red Rock Road ends on the west side. The job was coming to an end because of spring break, and some of the ride bans were on, which made it hard to move heavy loads during the day. At this time, the partial bans let heavy haul happen between midnight and 7 a.m. My advisor told me that I would be the last person to attack. The last lowboy on site was having trouble with his tie-downs, which kept him from leaving the site until about 3:30 am. By 1, everyone else had left the site. I stayed in that spot for 20 minutes after the last truck left, hoping that he would stay far enough ahead of my medical unit so that it wouldn't get hit with rocks and frozen mud chunks. I went into the Red Rock around 4 a.m., heading east. I had been there since 7 in the morning. The day before, I had already been awake for 21 hours. Because of this, I paid extra attention to both sides of the road and kept my speed between 30 and 40 miles per hour, hoping that would give me enough time to stop if a wild animal popped out in front of me. There was a lot of wildlife in this area. I saw deer, elk, lynx, moose, black bears, and even a grizzly, which was slowly eating grass in a ditch next to the road. Around here, the summer before I went to MTC, which is a mobile treatment center, was put on the bed of a 25-100 Dodge Ram 2004 extended cab. I kept the high beams on, and the lights lit up the whole road bed, the snow-strewn ice berm, and another 10M on both sides of the road. I remember driving by the area where the service rigs camp was set up to the left of the road and thinking that it looked pretty empty and deserted. I can see the area because of the starshine and the last few centimeters of snow on the ground. The snow berms, stumps, trees and gravel patches in the parking area of the camp all have shapes and shadows because of the snow and the snow. A few kilometers away from where the rig was set up, the Red Rock makes a gentle S-curve through a thicket of old trees on both sides of the road, which is about 500 m long. After this, Red Rock comes to a flat area where a road called Beaver Road splits off to the right and heads south. A graded left curve drops in a wide arc at about a 4's grade to cross a creek on a temporary 1-lane bridge. After going over the bridge, the road curved to the right and climbed back up out of the creek's floodplain at a 4 grade. I'm only about 52 inches tall, and sometimes when the grade was steep enough, I couldn't see the road in front of my rig until it started to level out. As I reached the top of the hill, I had slowed down to about 20 kilometers per hour because of this. When I was just about to speed up after coming out of the creek, a solid 5-pointed elk came out from the right side of the road, jumped over the berm, and landed about 4 feet in front of my fender. It scared the crap out of me. I was glad I had slowed down before I broke. Then I looked at how the elk were doing. After about 2 steps, he stops right in front of my truck. When I get closer to the elk, I can see that he is tired. His nose is up, almost like he is going to bugle. His horns are almost in a straight line with the line of his back. I can see his tongue hanging out of the side of his mouth, and I can see that one of his eyes is rolled back. What the heck is going on? It's not the rut, so why is this animal acting this way? The elk stood there for 3-5 seconds, panting, and then lowered his head to walk normally. He slowly moves to the left side of the street. I've always found that if there's one elk or deer on a road, there are usually more. So before I moved forward again, I looked down both sides. The roads were dark, but I could see as far as my headlights would let me. That's when I saw it. On this section of the Red Rock, like most gas field roads, 80 to 100 meters of trees were cut down along the right side of the road so that a pipeline could be laid to bring gas from the wells and field to the plant. The right way was cleared of wood, but the tree stumps were still there. which is normal when the pipe hasn't been laid yet. Between the starlight, the headlights and the snow, the stumps were the grey-brown colour of trees that had been dead for a few years. At the back of the clear-cut, I was able to find stumps and the bottoms of the tree trunks of the standing trees right away. This meant that I could finish the scan. I had been looking down the road ahead of me, and just as I was about to drive on, I saw movement on the right, which brought my attention back to that area. At first, I thought it was just a tall stump because it looked a bit taller than another stump. Nearby, a light breeze moved the fore/hair on this taller stump, and it shimmered like the hollow tips on a grizzly bear's coat and the truck's headlights. When I look more closely, I can see what looks like a head, but I can't see a face, and the width from shoulder to shoulder had to be at least 3 football helmets, or at least 1 meter. The shoulders were big, which was another sign that this shape was not that of a bear. This was my aha moment, and I now think I know what was making the elk run like a bear. And since it's coloured like a grizzly, I feel like the puzzle is solved and can move on, which is when it stands up on 2 legs. When I say so, it's true. What happens is that it opens up in a smooth and easy way. No swinging back and forth like a bear does to keep its balance while standing. I still think it's a grizzly bear based on how far it was from the side of the road, about 10-12 m, how bright the area was where the high beams were shining, and how the top of the standing form faded into darkness. I would guess that it is about 8 feet tall. The top part of its body faces east. Even though I can't see a face, I feel like it's looking down the road in the direction I'm going. I can see what looks like a head, but it's high enough that the top third of the body fades into darkness, which isn't much different from the darkness of the standing trees. There are a few more meters behind the shape. Think of dark blue-black fir trees, and the top of the creature should be dark black-brown. The next thing that surprised me was that when it dropped its arms, the left arm was long enough that, in the light of the high beams, I could see the shape of its range of motion and the large shape of a hand. Because of this, I say arms. It has a hand, not a paw. Its arm is longer, and its hand is lower than where a human hand would rest next to a human thigh. I'm starting to feel sick to the point where I feel like I should sit still, and I should really start driving away from this creature. My heart is pounding and my hair is standing up. I think, oh my God. As I carefully move forward, I half expect to see someone else step up to the road. I need a little time to think, but I think I just saw a Sasquatch. It probably took no more than 25 seconds from the time I stopped to look at the elk to the time I had to get back on the road. My initials are JM, and RS is the name of my friend, and we were hiking in California about a mile above San Canyon. He lost his glasses with prescription lenses, so we went our separate ways to look for them. I was hiking when I saw a very odd path. It looked like a person, but it was bigger than a person. Unless a person was walking barefoot through rough terrain a mile from the road, a person couldn't have done it. I met up with RS and showed him the print on the way back. He was in the army and served in Iraq. He loves to hunt, and the footprint just blew his mind. He told me, "Jay, look, you can even see the toe prints. This thing must be at least 7 feet tall." We looked at each other, and I asked, "How old do you think that print is?" He said, "It looks like it's about 3 days old." After we found his sunglasses, we both agreed that we should go back to the car and keep a very close eye out for anything strange. As soon as we got home, it began to snow. We both agreed that it was a good thing we were there to see it, because the snow would have covered it up. We went hunting in the Lake Hughes area of California one day after it had snowed. That day, 4 of us went hunting, my dad and myself and 2 good buddies. Well, it wasn't a very good day to hunt deer. So, one of my friends told us that my wife's uncle had left his cabin and wouldn't be coming back for a while. So why don't we go to his land, hang out, and eat lunch together? Well, he lives near where we were, near Lake Hughes Road. We went there and opened the gate for him because he had the key. We went there, and we had some apples with us for lunch. We saw some pigs, so we started giving them apples. After about an hour and a half of doing this, we heard horses running around and making all kinds of noise behind the house or cabin. We couldn't see what was going on because of the house, but man, they were going crazy. So we all said, "Let's go over there and see what's going on." We did, but we couldn't see anything. The horse is still acting crazy and running in circles. Then we looked over the fence and through a gate and saw these huge footprints and smelled something like a wet dog and rotten eggs. Mixed. Well, the gate was locked, so he went inside the cabin or house and got a key for the gate. So, we went to see the prints. I'm 65 years old and weighs 275 at the moment. I wear size 15, 4 shoes. Some of these tracks were made in the snow, and they were much bigger than my shoe. I walked up to them and tried to push down, but I couldn't go that far. I could maybe go down 3/4 to 1 inch. The snow around these prints was 4 inches deep. They were also 2-3 inches longer and much wider than my foot. Then I tried to step that far, but I couldn't do it. Then we kept following the tracks until they led us to this very steep hill. This thing climbed up this hill on 2 legs and stepped so high that my friend, who was a bodybuilder and in great shape, couldn't do it. I can't even lift my leg that far, and I was pretty flexible when I was 16 years old. No man could step that far or lift his leg that high. We didn't see any bear tracks anywhere. Even if we did, they wouldn't be able to walk that far on 2 legs. Whatever this was, it walked along this fence, turned, went back into the woods, and then went up this very steep hill. It must have looked at the horses and may have been seen feeding the hogs. We got scared and left the ranch, so I never saw it. I've told a few people this story, and they look at me and say, it could be, but you can tell they don't believe it. But when you see things like this, you know there's something out there. No one can make me change my mind about this. I know what I've seen, and it's not set up. No one knew that we were going to his ranch and the ranch next door. There was also no one there. So the only way this could be true is if it wasn't a fake. Did we see any signs of people on these paths or on that steep hill? I can tell that something is happening up there. From 1980 to 1985, I lived in Ridgecrest, Kern County, in the high desert of California. In the Sierra Nevada mountains, I did a lot of hiking. During that time, I never saw or heard anything strange. My mum, sister, and their families still live there, as do my brother and his family. From September 17 to September 27, 2007, my 19-year-old son and I went to see different family members. In California, Ridgecrest. On September 24, my sister drove me and my son up to the cabin and mining equipment at Cyber Family Gold Mine. We had been here for about an hour and were getting ready to leave. My sister was in the porta potty when my son and I heard a high-pitched scream that sounded like a woman hollering. We called back because we thought it was a woman in trouble, but no one answered. When I asked my sister if she had heard it, she said that she hadn't. I told her what we had heard, and she said that she had ridden a horse through this area and hiked through it, but she had never heard anything make that sound. Since 1980, she has lived in this area. I asked her husband, who is a big fan of hunting, horseback riding, trail riding, and hiking in these mountains. He said he didn't know of any animals in this area that made a high-pitched scream. My brother-in-law has also spent his whole life in the Ridgecrest, California area. In late September 1989, I was deer hunting. On Highway 178, about 5 miles west of Walker's Pass. I got off the highway for a short distance and walked about a 1/4 mile to a rocky bluff at the base of a big, steep mountain. I think it might have been Pinyon Peak. I kept getting the feeling that I was being watched as I sat there in the dark. I've had the same feeling before, and both times, as grey light came, I saw a mountain lion watching me from a distance. I started to look around in the steep, thick mountain behind me to see what was watching me. It was still pretty dark, and the brush was so thick that I couldn't see much. I don't know how long I had been there when I heard a very loud booming scream coming from the mountain behind me, about 100 yards away. It almost sounded like a scared woman yelling as loudly as she could. I thought at first that someone was just trying to trick me. The more I looked at how steep the mountain was, what time of day it was, early morning, when there was only grey light, and how thick the air is up there, the more scared I got. I felt worse and worse. I left the place right away. When I was about 14 years old, my family owned a ranch where I rode a horse. Somewhere in California is where the ranch is. I won't say where I was, but I was on a path that led to the edge of the forest that was still on our property. When I got there, there was a dead cow. It was mostly just bones, so it had been dead for a while. I was still on my horse when I looked around. I saw a Bigfoot at that time. He was very tall, black, and looked at me like a person, but he wasn't scared. I thought, that's Bigfoot. Bigfoot was leaning on a huge tree with one hand and arm. He looked like he was both human and ape. Bigfoot looked right at me, and both of us did nothing but stare at each other. I turned around and went back to the ranch because I was so scared. I think I've blocked this out of my mind for a long time because I was so scared. My dad and I talked about the ranch. I asked him if we still owned the ranch and the 10,000 acres, and he said no. He is 90 years old now. I asked him if anyone had ever said they had seen Bigfoot. He said yes, and I could show you where I saw him. I'm sure someone who lives in that area would also say they have seen him. Why? Since he is there. He is living out there. This happened 28 years ago, but I remember it and how he looked at me like it was yesterday. I work for the US Forest Service as a long-term seasonal worker. I know that animals leave different kinds of tracks, but what I and a co-worker saw was not a typical animal track. On this day, we went to Peyote Mountain to look for illegal OB trails. As the day went on, we went on 5 illegal trails around Landers Meadow and then decided to go to the Welding and Woolstaff Meadow area. We were on our way to the Weldon Meadow area when a rancher stopped us and asked if we had seen any of his cattle. Our answer was no. We'll let you know if we see them though. At Weldon Meadow, we never found them. We stopped for lunch, and this was the next place we were going to work while we were eating. The co-worker went out to look around. After about 10 minutes, a co-worker yelled at me to come see an ID and some animal tracks. These were not the tracks of animals. We saw something that looked like a human footprint, but it was way too big and the toe was a little off. They were about 16 inches long and 7 inches wide. They looked like the tracks I saw in the Six Rivers National Forest last year. I took a picture of the track and then looked to see where it was going. The tracks went along the fence with the barbed wire. Cattle are let out to graze in the meadow. My co-worker wanted to know what it meant. I just said, Bigfoot might have been looking for food or on its way to a spring. We then did our work at the end of the fence, so we could finish this area and move on to the other area. After we were done, we went to the Woolstaff Meadow area. Once we got down there, we did our jobs. As the project was being worked on, I saw the same tracks we had seen before. The tracks crossed the path and went towards some outcroppings of rock. This scared my co-worker enough that we left the area and went back to the office. When the co-worker told me about what we had seen, I laughed. I didn't tell them I took photos of the train tracks. I too would have thought it was funny at first. As background, I'd like to say a few things about myself. It will help explain why it took so long to write about this event. The sighting took place about 3 months before I joined the US Army. I was a paratrooper for 3 years and had a top-secret clearance. After my time in the military, I became a police officer in Los Angeles. I did that for 13 years, and now I work for the government as an agent. IG, from Washington, D.C., and with that history. You can probably see why I don't want to talk about it with too many people. At the end of the day, it could be bad for your career. Still, the thing did happen, and I still remember it very clearly many, many years after the fact. I got in touch with my friend who had seen what happened and asked him to tell me what he remembered. I wanted to see if what I remembered was true. It was perfect. A few months ago, I talked to my brother-in-law, who was there as a witness. I asked him after the fact if he remembered what happened, and he did. He is not the type of person who would believe such a story, though. He had not been semi-involved. This is what happened, though. Craig and I were both 17 and waiting to go to basic training for the army. In 1980, he was supposed to leave in June, and I was going in August. We were staying with my sister and brother-in-law at the time. They lived in a cabin in Green Valley, California. Craig and I enjoyed our last months as civilians in that area and used them to prepare for the hard training that was coming up. We ran along the mountain roads every day and hiked up the hills to get in shape for May. We decided to put ourselves to the test by camping for a full week. We knew that what we called the old campground would be the best place for this, because it was far away and had a good surface for climbing and hiking. So, we packed enough food for a week, and even though my sister Cindy and her husband Tom offered to drive us, we decided to go on our own. We decided to walk to the location like soldiers. We used 4 packs to do this. Tom and my sister told us that they would check on us at least every other day and bring us food, lemonade and other things. Tom also offered to give us 2 weapons to protect ourselves from strangers who might try to hurt us. Since this was before cell phones, we were pretty much on our own. Rattlesnakes were also a big problem in that area. So we gladly took him up on his offer. Later that day, we met Tom Menace in an area near the mine shafts. He gave us a money rifle, a 12-gauge shotgun and ammunition for both. The dirt road that goes back into the mountains from the main road goes a long way. In fact, if you followed it all the way to its end, you would end up on top of Grass Mountain Craig. My friend and I decided to get about 3 miles away from the highway, which was about a mile past an old campground from the 1920s. We found a great spot next to a clear running creek and set up our tent in a clearing. This clearing was surrounded on all sides by thick forests. Then it got dark, and as we talked by the light of our flashlights while lying in our tents, we both heard a loud snap in the woods. Behind the tent, we sat up and listened while we were frozen. We heard what sounded like a very large and heavy person slowly walking around our site, making no effort to hide his presence based on the loud sound of breaking sticks and brush. Both of us were scared when we thought someone was out there. We left the tent crag with a shotgun, and I carried an M1. I started shouting, "Hey, we know you're there! We've got guns, and we'll shoot again!" We could hear someone walking slowly but deliberately from our left to our right. When we turned our lights in that direction, we could only see trees and bushes. We talked about it and thought it might be a bear or something, but in the end, we decided it was a person and not an animal. After a lot of shouting and warnings that we would shoot, I decided to fire a few rounds in the direction of the noise. That sounds so crazy now. I did that too. I shot about 3 rounds into the trees, and the sound was so loud I couldn't believe it. The gun went off, and the sound echoed into the night, roaring into the canyons and fading into the night air. We stood there in silence, unable to believe, and then horrified by what we saw. Whatever it was started to move again, still from left to right in a circle around us. What we both thought and talked about later was that no animal would have stayed around after hearing the horrible sound of the mun. Most normal people also wouldn't have stayed around. Whoever or whatever was out there, though, not only stayed around, but also didn't seem to care about our weapons based on the sound of the slow walking, so we decided to leave the area quickly, grabbing our coats. We took our weapons with us and climbed up the slope to the dirt road. We ran the whole way, which was about 3 miles, back to the main road. We spent a very long night waiting for the sun to come up while curled up in a concrete drainage ditch. Every hour or so, a single truck would drive by, and the sound of it made us feel better. It took a long time. When we hiked back to the site the next day, we were worried that our tent and all of our supplies had been taken. Everything was right where we had left it, which was a surprise. We got our things together and walked back to the old campground's open area. We decided not to sleep in the tent because it was hard to see out of it. Instead, we spread out our sleeping bags in an open space above the creek. After a day of climbing cliffs and cooking in such places, night fell again that night just as the sun went down and darkness started to fall. Craig and I were walking toward the main road we wanted to reach. Rattlesnakes? Because we had shot one earlier as we walked side by side on the dirt road in the same area, with me on the left and both of us holding guns. We saw it standing right in front of us on the dirt road. There's no question about what it was. We were able to see it very well. He stood with his left shoulder even with the edge of the trail. He was about 8 or 9 feet tall. He had dark hair all over his body and long arms. Since then, I've heard about other sightings, but we didn't smell anything strange. The strange thing about him was that he didn't care about anything. He didn't seem dangerous. He didn't seem afraid. He did nothing but stand there and look at us. I put my right hand on Craig's chest without thinking, and we both stopped in our tracks. As we talked, we never took our eyes off the Bigfoot. I asked, "Can't you see that? Is this happening?" Craig just asked what we should do. What do we need to do? We both started to walk backwards as we spoke very slowly and unintentionally. The Bigfoot just stood there and looked at us for a few seconds. I will never forget what happened next. When he did that, Craig and I stopped and started talking over each other. Should we shoot? Should we take the shot? What do we do? Will you go with it? We were talking when we heard a sound that we both knew from the night before. The sound of the Bigfoot slowly walking deeper into the woods and breaking deadfall, twigs and branches as he went. We never shot at him or tried to follow him. We stayed up late and took turns sleeping at the campground, and the Bigfoot never came back. The next day, Tom brought food and other things. We rushed over to him and told him what had happened. By the way he looked, it was clear that he didn't believe us. We took him to the exact spot where we'd seen the Bigfoot, where we found a trail of huge footprints leading into the woods from the path. Tom gave us a smile and said we did a good job making them. We were so mad that we begged Tom to come with us and follow the tracks. We all followed them, and they went into and across the creek. On the other side, we found a big red ant hill with a footprint right on top of it. I spoke to Tom. What was wrong with us? He just smiled and shook his head. We followed the paths until we got to a place where two big hills made a valley that went up into a mountain. The prints stopped when the ground became rocky. That's what took place. I've had this memory for a long time. I'm 45 years old now, and what people think of me because of this doesn't bother me as much as it used to. Because of this fact, I know for sure that Bigfoot lives, or at least used to live, in the Green Valley area of California. At the time, I was hiking with a friend in the Angeles National Forest. My friend just came back from a USS MC, and we started going on hikes as often as we could. We were walking downhill along a small stream bed. The stream was dry, so we mostly had to jump from rock to rock until we reached the bottom of the hill. At one point, there was a small section off to the side that was just dirt. This made it much easier to walk down to the bottom. When we got to the bottom, we hiked some more. But as the sun started to go down, we headed back up the same hill creek bed. I went back up the way I came because I was tired of hopping from rock to rock on the way down. There was a terrible smell in the air, like rotten eggs or a portable toilet. Then I saw that a dead ground squirrel was lying on one of my boot tracks. I told my friend about this, and as soon as I did, I heard a door banging over a short hillside. It came from somewhere between 35 and 50 yards away from us. It sounded like someone was hitting a big log against a tree. When I looked to see what was making the noise, I saw that the tops of the trees were moving back and forth. All this time, it was possible to hear the trees being hit by the swing. Then the pounding stopped, and groans and screams could be heard coming from the same area where the trees were being hit. I've never heard anything like that before. I've heard mountain lion and black bear. This was very, very loud and nothing like that. In short, it was really scary. My friend asked if we could look over the small hill to see what was making the noise. No way, I told him, and he agreed. When we started to walk away, the banging and screaming stopped, but as soon as we stopped, the banging and screaming would start up again, and the trees would start to sway. We finally got out of there, and my friend didn't want to talk about what happened about 15 years ago. I was 17-18. I went hiking with a friend to try to get to Smith Mountain, which is near the edge of the San Gabriel Wilderness. We made it to the saddle, where the trail goes downhill into the wilderness, and where we were supposed to leave the trail and go south up the mountain, but we didn't feel like going any further. I think we rested for a while, and I remember just talking and hanging out. As we were getting ready to leave, we heard a strange sound coming from the bushes nearby. We stopped talking and listened. It sounded like a very loud, very low growl or snuffle. My first thought was that it was probably a bear, but I didn't know what it was, and it sounded like it was growling at us. Along the path, the bushes were so tall that we couldn't see through them. It scared us to death, so we dragged it back down the trail as fast as we could. I don't know if we ever talked about it again, besides maybe saying, "I wonder what was so scary," etc. But when I got home, I looked in the field guides to see what was making the noise. I was aware that there are a lot of bears, mountain lions, and bobcats in that part of the San Gabriel Mountains, so I thought it must be one of those. But after looking into other sightings in the area, I'm starting to wonder. In hindsight, it sounded a bit like an ape and was very low-pitched, so we almost didn't hear it and had to ask each other, "Are you listening? Take it as you must." I just think it's interesting given what else has been seen in the area. I only wish I could remember more details about how we were brave enough to stay longer and look into it more. We were traveling on a country road with my girlfriend, who later became my wife. The Panama Road goes from the edge of Bakersfield, California, to Lamont, a small town 14 miles outside of Bakersfield. This place is surrounded by farms, most of which grow grapes. I was going about 55 miles per hour, which was fast for my 1965 Mustang at the time. As we talked, we both saw something walk across the road very quickly. It was almost like a slow jog. I didn't slam on the brakes, but I did slow down so I wouldn't lose control and could try to figure out what we were seeing. As it ran into the field, we saw its right side and back. The head and shoulders were slouched, and there was no neck to be seen. It stood about 6 feet tall and had long arms and thick legs. As it crossed, it never looked at us. It was very dark, almost like a shadow, but it was real, and it looked very hairy as we went by. It never turned around. I stopped quickly and started making a U-turn. Then my girlfriend yelled at me and asked what I was doing. She was aware of what I was going to do. I drove back to where it ran into the field and turned on my bright lights, but I didn't say anything. My girlfriend was yelling at me to get going, so I did. The next day, I went back to the area, but it had rained, so I couldn't find any tracks. It had too much mud. My wife won't talk about it unless I do. Aside from that, she still doesn't talk about it. I don't know what we saw. I know it wasn't a person like we know them. I also can't say that it was a whole animal. Still, every time I drive by there, I wonder what we saw that night.